Hi guys, Lucas here, and welcome to the second video of this C# Basics series. And today we're just going to look at the syntax of C#, which is very useful if you haven't coded in C# before, or also if you're just new to programming in general. We're going to take a look at a lot of basic syntax. I'm not going to go into depth about it. First of all, we have comments, which are extremely important. This is basically text that is not used in the code. It's only used for the developer of the code so they can read it while reading the code, and we will also use it a lot here in this tutorial and in other tutorials. These are very useful for describing your code, so if you read your code later, then you know what the different part is if you remember to explain it. There are two main ways to write comments. You can make single line comments, which you'll probably use the most. You just put two slashes and then the rest of the line becomes a comment. You cannot make a comment in the middle of a line because everything after these slashes will become a comment. We also have multi-line comments, so they can contain multiple lines. Hello, future Lucas here. So while I was editing this video, I just came across the fact that I did not really introduce the core basic syntax. First of all, we have these curly brackets, and these are used for blocks of code. If we have an if statement, then we have two curly brackets here, and the noticeable thing is that everything between these two characters is part of this if statement. And this curly bracket can be anywhere. It can be literally here, it can be down here. It doesn't really matter because the code will figure out, just searches for this. And these can also be nested. So if we have an if statement for, say, inside of an if statement, then this statement is part of this statement, and this inside here is part of this one. So this can be thought of as both part of this and this at the same time. These curly brackets can also be used in other contexts, like defining a list of variables and other stuff, but they are mainly used for blocks of code. Then we have a semicolon, which is also very often used in C#. This is used at the end of every instruction, and an instruction is basically just logic. Let's say we have this method, then when we call it, we basically instruct to use whatever is inside of this, and therefore end it by a semicolon. We can also use the inbuilt method console.writeLine with some text, and then we have a semicolon at the end. And we can also put this variable a to the value 5. So these are at the end of every instruction. The thing to note is, let's say we want to print this thing inside of writeLine. Then we might be tempted to just copy paste the entire instruction and put it inside of this other instruction. But here you get an error, because if we have an instruction inside of an instruction, then we only have the semicolon at the end of the total instruction. And this also means that you can have everything on the same line in C#. It doesn't really matter with spacing and stuff. Of course, you cannot have spaces inside of randomly, but between stuff you can have as many spaces and weird things as you want. Don't worry about that, because C# is smart and it looks for these signs to know where something starts and where something ends. Let's get back to the main video. While you're coding stuff in C#, you might stumble across these using tags. Most environments, including Visual Studio, these will just appear out of thin air, and you don't need to worry as much about them. It's basically telling which libraries to use. So we're using system, then we have access to things in the built-in system classes, or namespace in this case. So yeah, basically don't worry too much about them. They should appear by themselves when you start using these namespace methods and stuff. Then we have variables and how to initialize and declare them. So as we went over in the last video, variables is your main way to store data in programming. Variables are declared as below, where you have its type. It can even be program if you want. It can essentially be any type, even constructed types. Right now we're just using the primitive built-in types. So first of all, we declare what type the variable has. We declare a name or label for the variable so we can refer to it later. And then we either initialize it right at the spot with a value or just leave it uninitialized. As you can see, we cannot access it without initializing it. So that's how we declare variables. Then we have how we get some text in the console when we run our program, so we can have some feedback, see if things work like intended. We use the statement called console.writeLine, and that takes any kind of value and converts it to a string if it's not already a string. So it can print text basically. And we can also use console.write. The difference is writeLine creates a line break at the end, whereas write just prints it. So if you use this, it will not make a line break. So the next statement will start on the same line essentially. We can also use this tag \n to line break manually. That's essentially what writeLine does at the end. And then we can also use variables inside of our write statements by adding a $sign before the string and using these curly brackets around each variable that we want to display. So that's how we can print variables inside of text. We can also just print a variable by itself. Then we have if-else statements. These are main logic statements that we use to check if something is something, then we do something. If not, then we can do something else or even just go on. If age is greater than or equal to 18, we write you are an adult. Else if can we also use to check if this is not true, but this is true. So that's a little more advanced one. Else if age is greater than or equal to 13, we can write you're a teenager. And else, if none of the other things is true, we can write you're a child. And we can also make these statements more fancy by using them inline. This only works if the statement only contains one line. But yeah, if you need more lines, this will not work. Essentially, then we need to use these curly brackets, which is also called a block, and they can contain a lot of code. Then we have the operators. The first set is for comparison, and these are also well known in maths in general. They're used to compare primarily numbers, but this one and this one can also be used to compare other things. This means less than, this means greater than, this means less than or equals, this means greater than or equals, this means equals, and this means not equals. And these can also be used by any type, while these are only for numbers. We also have logic operators that we often use amongst these comparisons if we want to check if something is equal something or if it's equal something else. These are also known in maths. Or this is and, so if something is true and another thing is true, then the result will be true. If something is true or another thing is true, then something will be true. So yeah, logical AND, logical OR. Then we have mathematical operators. We have the 4 common: plus, minus, multiply, divide, and then we have modulo, which is the remainder on division. We also have some fancy ones. So if you do plus equals, it means add this value to this variable, essentially. And same with these, but just subtract, multiply, divide. And double plus means increment. That is essentially just add 1 to this variable. And the same as double minus sign is decrement. So if we have h plus plus, it means that we take h and add 1 to it. Or we can say h plus equals 1 to add 1. We can also say h equals h plus 1. And don't confuse singular equal sign with double equal sign. This is assigning a variable this value, while this is asking, is this equals this, which returns either true or false. We also have binary operators. I will not explain these today because you probably won't use them unless you're making some advanced binary things. So, but this is how they look. Then we have loops, which is also very important if you want to do things multiple times. The most common loop is a for loop, which essentially does something a set amount of times. In this case, it will write the integer I 3 times, where it starts at 0, then goes to 1, then goes to 2. This can look extremely intimidating at first, but you will get used to it. Basically, we're just saying which value does I start at, what is the condition to continue the loop. The condition is that I is less than 3, that's why we ended at 2. And the last part is, what do we do after the loop is over? We increment I. This is the most common way of doing it. So you will see this a lot of times, but it can look intimidating if you're not used to this. So yeah, you just follow along. You might not understand it when doing it, but as I said, you will get used to it after doing it a lot of times. We also have, if you want to store multiple variables, we can use an array, which we declare by the type and then this syntax, 2 square brackets. And this is basically a list of strings. This is the most simple kind of list, called an array. Yeah, and I know that array is not part of its syntax, it's just these square brackets, but when you see these, you know it's called an array. And this array of fruits has 3 items, and these are all strings because it's a string array. And the thing about arrays is they have a fixed size, so we cannot add more items. We cannot add a 4th item after declaring it. Then we need to redeclare it or redefine it. If you already know that you're going to store exactly 3 of this item, then you would use an array. We can also use a for each loop, which essentially is a for loop to go through each item of an array. If you, however, want to have a flexible list that you can add items to or even remove items from, then you would use the more advanced version, which is called a list. And this syntax is very weird if you haven't seen it before. It's basically just list and then of what type you want the list. And then again, its name, just like any other variable. So this is essentially just variable declaration. We have the type, the name, and its value. So yeah, we give the list a name, and then we need to construct the list, which is also a bit intimidating, because what the hell is new list if you haven't seen that before? That's just what you do when declaring a list. You use this syntax. You create a new list of the type and put it to your list object. And this works the same way as an array, but it's more flexible. As said, you can use .add, for instance, to add even more items to it. So it's not fixed in size as the array is. You can also remove items, and then you can also use a for loop for these if you want. Then we also have methods, which you will also use a lot. This is basically just a piece of code or a piece of instructions that each time you call this method, it will run all these instructions. And what does void mean? That's just confusing, right? And void is confusing at first. It just means that this method does not return anything. For now, you just know a void method just does stuff. So this method say hello will print hello. We can also, instead of void, use a type, any type, and then the method can return that type. So in this example, we console.writeLine next number, then we get the return of that method. I will not go too much in depth about it because it is difficult if you're not experienced in programming to understand at first. Just know that this is a method. You can always recognize methods because they have either void or a type first, and then a name, 2 parentheses, and then a square bracket. That's how all methods are built essentially. You can also have something called parameters, which is basically just an input in the method. So this method next number takes in an integer number and returns the number plus 1. So it basically just tells the next number. You can see return type as an output and parameters as inputs. Also note that you can have multiple parameters. You can have, if you want to skip a number, but you cannot have multiple returns. Then we have a method call. This is how we use a method. We just use the method name and the parentheses. Then we use any parameters, if any, and then we use a semicolon unless we're inside something else that uses a semicolon. If we just have it by itself, we always end it with a semicolon. So yeah, let's try running this. Alright, so as you can see, we print hello world. We also print the text after this is on the same line, and it's not, because we used a line break character. So unless I use a line break character, and this is on the same line, however, because here we did not use a line break character and we used write here instead of writeLine. So we get this stacked up against each other. And our variable is included. And then we use the if statement. We get you're an adult because age is 21. Then later here with the inline if statement, we get you're not 5 years old because age is not equals to 5. Then we have the for loop. So it prints 0, then 1, then 2, because I starts at 0, then 1, then 2, and it prints for every iteration. Then we have the for each loop, where we print each element of this array. And we also have a for each loop for our list, and we can see here that it removed Subnautica but added Celeste because we manipulated the list. This might be a bit weird. We have this say hello, but 6 comes before, and that is because methods doesn't actually do anything until you call them. So we ignore this for now. Then we go call them in the opposite order of the definition of them. So we call this next number one before we call say hello. So we get this number because we used 5 as input, and it returns 5 plus 1, which is 6. And then we call say hello, which just prints hello. So this is the basics of C# syntax. So yeah, I would advise you to get familiar with the syntax, maybe play around with it a little bit. But yeah, I hope you learned something. Bye.